Kempe Rano, DACM, LAC, CHT, is a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, licensed acupuncturist, transformational coach, and hypnotherapist, specializing in chronic pain and illness, major life changes, cult recovery, and medical abuse. Having spent 8 years in a New Age spiritual cult, Kim recognized many parallels between the spiritual cults and the wellness industry during her experience deconstructing, noting the potential harm that can often arise in such environments. To further her training in cultic abuse and recovery, she translated this knowledge to assist her clients who have been affected by the wellness industry, as well as more conventional cults and experiences of spiritual abuse. She is currently working on a Master's of Organizational Psychology and writing her debut book, America's Cult of Wellness, Wellness, Wealth, and the War on Modern Medicine. Stay in touch at kimperano.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome, Kim.
Hi everyone, I am really excited to be sharing this information with you today, so thank you for tuning in. Today we're talking about influencers, ideologies, and isolation, the digital rise of exploitative wellness movements. I am Dr. Kim Perano. I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine, licensed acupuncturist, and certified hypnotherapist. I have been in the alternative wellness industry for over 15 years now, and I kind of hate it. And that is not because I think that acupuncture or hypnosis or coaching are not useful modalities, but that the industry has become really riddled with scammers and misinformation that's actually causing patients harm. A lot of my practice has shifted over the last couple of years, and a lot of the people I work with now are where we're working specifically on the harms that they have experienced at the hands of alternative wellness movements, and that harm is very vast. We'll get into it in a minute. So a lot of my practice has shifted. I am currently working on a master's in organizational psychology to make that complete shift, kind of out of direct patient care and into helping people lead with authenticity and integrity. I'm also a New Age cult survivor. So I spent 8 years in a New Age spiritual cult that was heavily influenced by Scientology. And it was in my deconstruction of that experience that I started to notice how coercive control showed up in many different facets of life. And the wellness industry is absolutely one of them. So I have a lot of information to cover today, and we are just gonna dive right in. So let's go. So what's the harm in wellness? When we think about wellness, I think we think it's kind of innocuous, like taking an herb or changing your diet isn't potentially that harmful. And like at face value, it isn't that harmful. It's when we sort of get into this, what I dub the e-cult of wellness or the cult of wellness, that it starts becoming something that can be very problematic. So harm shows up in a couple of different ways. We have financial, physical, mental, emotional, and then we have some more systemic harms, which is isolation and division, and a diversion of attention away from actual systemic solutions. So under the financial abuse, we have things like expensive supplements, retreats, biohacking tools, miracle treatments. These all prey on people who are very vulnerable and often kind of desperate. People with chronic diseases are looking for solutions. And if they're not finding them with their medical team, they're looking for them in wellness. And this can mean blowing an entire life savings in some cases, because a lot of these practitioners charge very high prices to work with them. And a lot of these treatments don't have the effectiveness that they claim to have. So physical harms are also very vast and varied. Some people experience no physical harm whatsoever, others can be significant. Risky detoxes, right? Supplements are unregulated, they're often overprescribed or in extreme dosages. We have extreme diets, which can lead to malnutrition. We have delays in care and avoidance of medical care in general. All of this can lead to things like malnutrition, drug supplement interactions, overdosing on supplements, exacerbation of illnesses. So your type 1 cancer turning into type 4 because the naturopath told you not to go to an oncologist or that they could cure you, and even death. And if you've tuned into my previous presentations at ICSA in 2024, I talked about a patient that I had who died because of wellness practices. So this is a topic that is really important, and the potential harms and consequences are really severe. Next up, we have mental and emotional harms. And more often what we're seeing here are things like developing eating disorders and OCD-like behaviors. We're really focused on being perfect in the wellness industry and doing everything right and getting, checking off all the boxes, which can lead to a lot of shame and blame and guilt when people don't do things correctly. A lot of the time, we're also internalizing the cause of our illness or the reason we're not getting better as something we're personally doing wrong. And that can also lead to this shame, blame, guilt, fear, implanted phobias, anxieties, etc. So isolation and division is how we experience harm by being separated from our communities, our friends, our families, whatever it is. A lot of how the cult of wellness works is that we're telling you, I know this information, they don't, or this stuff is good, that is bad, and if you go over here, you are bad as well. So there's a lot of isolation, pulling people apart, black and white thinking, all or nothing dynamics that come into play, and this can separate people from their families, from their friends, and from legitimate healthcare information as well. And then next we have the diverted attention. This is something that we don't often think about when we think about the harms of wellness, but it's something that is really pervasive. And this is that toxic individualism coming to fruition. If I'm only focused on myself, on what I'm doing, or maybe I'm judging people for what they're doing or what I think they're not doing, I'm not focused on systemic solutions. So things like, being obsessed over food dyes or ingredients in foods, meanwhile ignoring food insecurities, access to food, access to healthcare, things that are actually solvable problems, we divert that attention away from actually fixing the issues. So wellness isn't anything new, right? We've had wellness exist since the dawn of time, right? The proverbial snake oil salesman has always existed. In the 19th century, we saw kind of more of a rise, chiropractic care, naturopathic care. In the 20th century, that rise continued as we started, blending with other cultures more, which was a really great thing. But when we have that combination of wellness with spirituality, with morality, it starts to get a little fuzzy, and that's where things can get kind of complicated. Wellness has always been intertwined with culture, spirituality, and often a distrust of conventional mainstream medicine and treatments. In the wellness industry, especially digital wellness, we have a lot of self-appointed authorities as well. So this is those charismatic figures. They are claiming they have special knowledge. I know this, but your doctor doesn't. And they're positioning themselves as the experts and simultaneously othering and positioning mainstream medicine and information, scientific knowledge, evidence-based research as corrupt, evil, etc. So don't trust them, but definitely trust me, despite the fact that I have absolutely no education or background in healthcare whatsoever, is often what we hear from these types of influencers. The wellness industry also gives us this illusion of accessibility, right? So changing your diet, taking a herb, those things all seem really easy to do. It's something that feels like anybody should be able to do it. Anybody should be able to go for a walk every day. The truth is not everybody has that ability and they don't have that accessibility. From the very bare minimum, right, changing our diet, eating healthier foods, we have issues like food insecurity, time, income disparities, etc. And on the bigger end of the spectrum, a lot of wellness practitioners and treatments, etc., are very, very expensive. So they're costly and they're not accessible, truly. To meal prep your entire week of food takes a couple of hours a week, and not everybody has those few extra hours. The next factor that causes this that's been contributing to that rise of digital wellness is the virality of misinformation. The truth is, like, things that sound too good to be true, that sound outlandish, that really polarize information, goes viral. And evidence-based, like, legitimate information that draws, that lives in that gray area does not go viral. A saying I say often is certainty is sexy. And that means we are really drawn to the person who says, I can cure you, and your doctor has no idea what they're talking about. Meanwhile, the person who says, hey, I have some evidence-based possible solutions for you, like, that's not as interesting. And so the algorithms reward attention, not accuracy. And that's something we have to remember, that just because somebody has 100,000 followers doesn't make them an expert in anything but gaining 100,000 followers. So this is what I call the e-cult of wellness. It's kind of this web of people and ideas that all cross over into each other. And these lines are not solid, right? These things blend into each other. People can exist in more than one category, and they all can kind of have the similar effects despite where they are on this chart. It's just kind of a nice way to look at it, right? So we have influencer gurus, alt health healers, conspiracy theorists, purity culture, and toxic individualism that all kind of make up those core tenets of the e-cult of wellness. The causes that they have are things like unattainable perfectionism, pseudoscience and dubious treatments, institutional distrust, moral superiority, and ableism. Now, this chart is a little graphic of the control dynamics of the e-cult of wellness, or the cult of wellness in general. And it kind of just lays out the factors that contribute to somebody falling down this trap, because we are all susceptible to it. You know, if you got a chronic illness tomorrow or a terminal diagnosis, we are going to try to figure out how to not have that be the outcome. And people who prey on that fear and insecurity are the ones who are probably going to find our attention if we are not really aware of it. And we're going to talk about some solutions at the end of the presentation too. So we have our charismatic leaders, gurus, influencers. We have a strong isolation that happens here, this us versus them mentality. There is a lot of emotional manipulation and coercive tactics that take place in the cult of wellness. They all, in some form or fashion, usually contribute to some sort of blame and shame for patients and clients. There's a promise of perfection and exclusivity, right? If you're healthy, you're special. And all of this kind of underscores this loyalty and fear of leaving that's created. And sometimes that's, you know, a sunk cost fallacy. Other times it's an identity issue. And so all of these different dynamics play into that cult of wellness. So our first category is influencer gurus. This is Gwyneth Paltrow on the slide here. And some key facets of influencer gurus are, you know, this is the charismatic leader, right? They're building a community through manipulation, and they're offering the illusion of expertise. Body checks, beauty, and perfection, along with a massive social media following, give influencers a type of warped authority in the wellness space. And manipulation of many things like photos, information, and impact leads followers to believe that, you know, with this magic pill, I will be cured, I will be healthy, I will be beautiful and successful. Charismatic, persuasive claims to have exclusive knowledge, markets wellness as a spiritual path. These are all the tactics of the influencer guru, right? It's this special thing that we have access to and they don't. Gwyneth Paltrow, excellent example, right? She has no business giving anybody health advice, and yet she does all the time. The medical medium in the cult that I was in, I can't tell you how many times I was told to drink celery juice. That was one of his claims to fame. You know, downloading information from spirit or God, and using that to make medical decisions, which we see in a lot of more religious and spiritual cults as well. Teal Swan, of course, is a very controversial spiritual influencer, right? And her methods are often very critiqued and problematic. So what these people are doing is cultivating a following by fostering distrust, right, of the outsiders. They are creating that echo chamber, monetizing loyalty through their courses, through the supplements, through access to them, through the retreats. This creates this really strong us versus them, in versus out dynamic at play. And there are high costs to leaving, right? If you spent 12 grand on a protocol and it wasn't working, it was actually causing you significant side effects, you're going to think a little harder about throwing in the towel. And you're often going to be told, oh, it's just difficult now, it gets better later. So in essence, what we're doing here is dismissing conventional medicine as corrupt and ineffective. And these people are, of course, are offering that illusion of expertise. They have that following, they have the charisma, and when we see charisma and experience it, it seems like that person is legitimate, despite the fact that they might not be. They're loading the language a lot of the time with scientific sounding language, which seems reasonable. It makes them seem knowledgeable. Words like quantum, biohacking, cleanses, detox, all of those words come up a lot, and they sound scientific, so we pay attention. Influencer gurus, like, do not have medical licenses most of the time. And when we don't have a medical license on the line, the consequence for spreading misinformation or even harming people is actually kind of low, right? You don't have malpractice insurance because you don't have a practice and you don't have a license. So this is something to keep in mind, right? If we don't have a license, there's a very low bar for accountability here. And what these people are ultimately doing is just manipulating attention into authority. So our alternative health healers are sort of an extension of the influencer guru. And they have, with the caveat that they have an actual license, they have actual training, education, background. Not all disciplines are licensed, but they have education, right? And so now they're manipulating their education and the license to make you think that they know more than they actually do and or operate completely out of their scope of practice. So these are the acupuncturists and chiropractors who call themselves functional medicine doctors. There's no such thing as a functional medicine degree. That's not a legitimate title, but because they have a doctorate degree, and they practice functional medicine, which is not a licensed industry, right? There's no license or regulations for that. They're calling themselves functional medicine doctors. I'm in the state of California, and this is totally illegal to do, right? I have a doctorate degree. I can use the title of doctor if I clarify after my name what type of doctor I am. Because the assumption is that if you're not an MD, people automatically assume you are if they hear the title of doctor. And I think functional medicine doctor is specifically misleading in this sort of way. I had a patient once who told me she was on her way to see her functional neurologist, who was a chiropractor, but she thought of him as a neurologist because that's how he referred to himself. These people are really, continuing to sow that us versus them mentality that we see present in the cult of wellness, where I have this unique information, I know the truth, I have the cure, they don't. Western medicine is bad. All these things are bad. They're going to harm you. There's so many toxins. You need to do this detox. And that us versus them mentality can get especially severe in the alt health healer world, where practitioners might actually bar their clients and patients from seeing medical doctors, right? If you go see a medical doctor, this is my cat Marcus, if you go see a medical doctor, you can't see me. Or if you go take that medicine, you have to do this detox and protocol, to repent in a sense. These people are ultimately just selling false hope, right? They're really preying on chronically ill, terminally ill, desperate patients who want answers and they're not giving them, or they're not getting them for some reason or another. Either there isn't an answer, which is true a lot of the time with chronic illness, like there's ways to manage, but not always, or they're not able to access their healthcare providers in the way that they need to. And in the United States, this is a huge problem. Some real life examples of these types of practitioners is Joe Dispenza, Barbara O'Neill, Joseph Marcola, all people operating in questionable territory, in my opinion. And ultimately, what they're telling us is trust me, not them. Trust me, my knowledge. I know more. I'm on your side. There's a big financial commitment to get that person on your side too, but they don't know what they're talking about. So trust me, don't trust them. So our conspiracy theorists are really the extreme version of these first two categories. And then of course they can all overlay with each other, right? This is where we see us versus them being taken to this very aggressive extreme. The wake up culture, you're all sheep and I know the truth and the government's trying to put microchips in your body with vaccines. There's a lot of distrust in big pharma, in modern medicine, pharmaceuticals, vaccines, chronic illness treatment. A lot of it's kind of framed as this they make money, so this is bad, which is just really interesting because the wellness industry outshines the pharmaceutical industry by trillions of dollars. What makes this catch on, I think, is that there is an ounce of truth to it. I'm in the United States and our healthcare system is a dumpster fire. It's really hard to get care. It's very expensive. People go bankrupt because of healthcare costs. You might have to wait 6 months to see a doctor that's in your network, right? So our care system is really messed up. It makes it really hard for people to get the care that they need and to make it affordable. So that distrust and dissatisfaction, disillusion with the system is valid. I think that it's, misplaced or we take it out of context, right? The system is a disaster, but the actual treatments, the actual doctors are not the problem, right? The system is the problem. The treatments aren't the problem, or we're failing to see the difference between the two. Not that the doctors can't be the problem also. There's definitely bad doctors out there. But there's that, the systemic flaws in those insurance profit-driven models, the lack of access, that's where the issue is. And so it's founded in this sort of fundamental truth and then blown out of proportion. And with the conspiracy theorists, we're really in that echo chamber, right? We have isolation, groupthink, we're rejecting mainstream society, and we're really polarizing that us versus them even more. Purity culture is one of these underlying facets of the cult of wellness. And we've seen this for centuries, where purity and the quest for purity is considered this moral and obligation and noble pursuit. And it can be purity in many different ways, but wellness is certainly one of the ways that it shows up. So we see this like clean living as a moral imperative. If you are sick and you are not healthy, that is your fault. We saw this happen with the COVID pandemic specifically, where it was like, if they're fat, if they have diabetes, if they have these underlying health conditions, that's their fault and they deserve to die. I vividly remember hearing that from many different avenues. And that's a really messed up thing to think and say, because we don't actually have as much control over our health as we think we do. We can change lifestyle factors, but the effect that those things have is largely out of our control. So we have this clean living, moral superiority. We're obsessed with clean living. Natural is best. Natural products, no medicines, all of those things. Some examples of people in this industry include the Food Babe, Wellness Mama, Brian Johnson. I find particularly fascinating. He's like a billionaire who spends millions of dollars a year on wellness protocols to anti-age. And he's changed his appearance dramatically. But his whole life is wellness, right? It's completely inaccessible. So the biohackers really look up to him. So within purity, we have that like natural is best wellness, but we also have biohacking, which is, you know, the ice baths and the wearing all the trackers. So we're really digging into that obsessive compulsive sort of tendency. There's a lot of unrealistic standards here. This is that quest for unattainable perfection. Which causes us to like strive and go after this idealized version of ourselves that might not actually be possible. It might not be something we can do. And we're taking that on, you know, if we don't successfully do these things, we're taking it on as us failing in a like moral way, right? I'm morally inferior because I have a chronic illness. Again, we're reinforcing us versus them. And this way, you know, it's kind of a judgy way, right? If they have a chronic illness, that's their problem. They're not doing enough about it. You're not praying hard enough. You're not eating the right foods. You're not taking the right supplements, all of those things. It's your fault, your fault, your fault. And that's a lot of shame and blame. Any imperfections, personal flaws, health struggles, that's all your own fault. And this is so harmful to patients, especially people with chronic and terminal illnesses. We have that toxic cycle of self-blame, self-shame, and we have to fix ourselves all the time. The rise of purity culture can be traced back for centuries, but saw a rise during the Reagan era, where the promotion of personal responsibility and self-reliance intertwined with a moralistic view of health and success, fostering a narrative that those people who struggled with illness, poverty, or mental health were simply failing to live up to societal ideals. The emphasis on self-made success created a deep separation between the deserving and the undeserving, which reinforced ableism by positioning people with chronic conditions or disabilities as morally inferior or weak, further marginalizing those who couldn't meet the unrealistic standards for purity and perfectionism and perfection, really. And we're seeing a recycle of this again with the Trump administration, where people who have mental health issues, chronic illness, like the research is being cut, the funding is being cut, and weird things are happening, and it's very concerning. At the heart of the wellness industry is this sense of toxic individualism. You're responsible for your own stuff. You're responsible for your health. You know, the purity culture edge of it is if you don't, you're a moral failure. And this is that myth of the self-made success, right? We're emphasizing individual effort, willpower, discipline. Those are how you have success. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? We're overlooking that systemic issue. Inequality, access, all of those external factors are completely avoided when we fall into the trap of toxic individualism, and that's why we don't make progress here. This is all about blaming the victim. You have a problem, you have a health issue, that's your fault. You're not trying hard enough, you're not doing anything about it. You are morally or personally deficient, and that reinforces the idea that your hardships are a failure to try hard enough. So with purity culture, your hardships are a failure of your moral superiority. With toxic individualism, we take it even deeper to you're just not trying hard enough. This is where we have that denial of systemic barriers, and we really miss an opportunity to change the outcomes of health, like of public health, because of this. We're so focused on these minute details or your personal responsibility that we're not taking care of our communities as a whole, and that does not help anyone, but particularly our public health. Some real life examples of people who kind of fall under this toxic individualism, or where it can turn that way. Toxic individualism is interesting because it, taking ownership over your own stuff is really important, right? We have to own our own things, but there's a limit to it where it becomes a toxic kind of self-cycle. So we have Tony Robbins, Dave Asprey, who's like the bulletproof coffee guy, right? You can biohack, but like, can you afford it? Joe Rogan, I'm not even going to talk about him because that is a man who's causing some problems. And really what toxic individualism does at its core is just perpetuating ableism, right? We're failing to recognize challenges faced by individuals with chronic illness, disabilities, other health conditions, and we're perpetuating ableism by equating success with physical and mental perfection. So what's the role of social media in isolation and radicalization when it comes to health and wellness information? This is sort of a timeline of like how this occurs and how people go deeper down this little rabbit hole. First, we have our initial engagement. So where people are, you're trying to find out answers to health questions and we start looking for it. The algorithms start feeding you things that are similar to things you've liked or you've spent a lot of time and attention on. And if we're not really conscious of how we're doing that, it can start putting us down the echo chamber of misinformation quite quickly. So we're reinforcing our initial beliefs, our interests, and then we wind up in the echo chamber. This is where alternative health gurus and conspiracy theorists really rise, because that echo chamber reflects and keeps pumping through the same information. So this is that hidden truths, I know the truth and they don't, pushing us further into that isolation and pushing us further away from broader perspectives. And as we exist in that echo chamber even more, we start having that increased dependency on those influencers, right? Now we can't make any healthcare information or decisions without consulting or checking what they're talking about first. So we become more emotionally and psychologically invested in the content and the information, and we're really relying on those tight-knit communities for information, which frame that mainstream society as like ignorant and harmful. So they're really capitalizing on our fears and the doubt that we have. And then this stage of dissonance and fear mongering. So we're really bought into the influencer, to whatever it is that we're listening to, and that fear mongering continues. So pharmaceuticals, government control, that us versus them mentality is further reinforced, more distrust of outsiders. And this makes it really hard for followers to question beliefs. This is where, if we had a belief and we were in this echo chamber, somebody giving us contrary information where we might outright reject it or bypass it entirely because it doesn't match our belief system. And it's really hard to break free from that. And that's where we end up in this radicalization and community breakdown. That final step involves exclusivity within the online group, and that makes it difficult for people to return to their former lives. We have some sort of exit costs for leaving, and it's really difficult to break free of that kind of trap, if you will. So there are many contributing factors to why the cult of wellness exists, and I think all of them are kind of utilized in a sense to manipulate. Again, so these are like the golden nuggets of truth that exist that then unethical people wield as tools of power. So we have these kind of 5 different things. We have failing healthcare systems, right? Which is, in the United States, we talked about it earlier, it's really hard to get healthcare that's affordable, that you have accessible, with doctors that you like, where you can have more than 10 minutes with your doctor. It's really difficult, especially if you have a chronic illness, to get somebody who's listening to you. We have a loss of ritual, right? We've seen the rates of religious adherence come down over time. And ritual is actually a really important aspect of the human condition and a need. It helps us mark time. It helps us feel like we belong. It helps us feel like, other people know who we are by our participation in those rituals. So when we have a decline of religion, we have a void for a ritual. And wellness gives us that that answer, right? Taking a pill every day is a ritual. Going to a healer is a ritual. There's special clothes, a special place. So that feeling of control that we get through the ritual comes out. Capitalism, another huge contributing factor, right? The wellness industry profits off of this. And that's something, you know, where the you're a stooge for big pharma or you're getting paid by big pharma comment is always kind of lands the wrong way with me, because all these wellness influencers are getting paid, right? They're all selling something. So we don't really have, you know, the core of that argument is like, the argument isn't really about big pharma. It's really about capitalism, and unfettered capitalism at that, where people are selling you stuff that you don't need or want, or that's too expensive, right? The denial of death and mortality is another issue. Like United States culture, like we don't talk about death a lot. It's really like taboo subject. And I think that's something that comes into play, especially with chronic and terminal illness, where like bodies are not made to last forever. We've gotten really obsessed with biohacking and anti-aging and all of these things, which is cool, right? Because like facing our death is very scary and it's very uncomfortable. But when we take that to the extreme, we're, you know, now we're trying to do all of these different things instead of face our own reality and our own mortality. And that's not necessarily a good thing. And finally, this loss of control. And I think that's what really sums it up, is that, you know, we live in a culture right now where we don't have a lot of control. We don't have the freedoms that we think we do. You know, back in the 70s, 80s, like you could work as a clerk in a Safeway, grocery store, and make enough money to support yourself, your partner, and your 2 kids, and buy a house. And now we have people with 2 incomes, no kids, and can't buy a house at all. So we don't have as much control as we used to, and it's kind of been this ongoing snowball of loss of control. When we start taking control of our health, we feel more in control. That's satiating. It feels good to do something about it, and that can be one of the contributing factors for why wellness has boomed so much, particularly out of the COVID pandemic too, because that like really made people sucked into their phones and really pointed at that loss of control and the denial of death pieces. So here are some possible solutions for how we can navigate influence and coercive control in wellness. I'm just going to pop this up full size on the screen because there's a lot to go over here. So we have critical media literacy is really the first and most important step in this. We have to really learn how to develop critical skills to assess wellness content and really any content online. We want to learn how to fact check, how to recognize advertising tactics, and how to understand scientific evidence. You know, if we didn't take courses in college about how to understand research, this is really hard to do. Even as somebody with a doctorate, a master's, and working on a second master's, understanding research still takes a lot of brain power for me to figure out because it's more complicated than we think it is. We have to learn how to really separate fact from fiction here. We want to start also questioning and seeking out multiple perspectives. Something that I always do is like, if I have a really strong belief, I'm always asking myself like, what's the chance I'm wrong about this? And that gives us that variety of viewpoints within that wellness space. And that's going to break down those echo chambers where we can listen to medical professionals, researchers, lived experiences, some of these other influencers, and then tie it all together to make informed choices instead of coerced choices. And we really want to have this like accountability for wellness influencers and promoting that authenticity and transparency. Obviously, like influencers don't have a lot of accountability. There's not licenses on the lines, things like that. But, you know, regulation, peer-reviewed evidence, really seeking that out, encouraging ethical marketing practices. Maybe we're calling this out. Maybe we're sharing things with our friends to say, hey, you know, that person is like misusing this term, or they're not fully understanding it, or why are we trusting them so much when they don't have the expertise that we would really expect. Authenticity and transparency really needs to be promoted. And I want to see people who are really embracing honesty about their qualifications, right? If we have good information, my qualification is less important actually, right? People hire untrained coaches all the time because they believe that person can help them. So it's not always about the qualification, although that is important and necessary to be able to make certain specific healthcare recommendations. But, you know, why can't we be transparent about those credentials and education about the methods, about the potential risks. We want transparency. And we can start to promote that transparency by rewarding those people who are transparent, who are bringing receipts to the table, to the post, or whatever it is, with our time, with the like, with the share, with letting the whole video play all the way through. That's going to amplify those people's content. That's what we really want to see out there. We also want to promote those supportive communities, right? Moving away from that us versus them mentality. I think healthcare is a team effort. It is not a place where, we want to be in a siloed vacuum with only one provider. There are multiple people that are going to help you with your health, and we want to focus on that empowerment, inclusivity, and holistic health that reduces divisiveness and harmful influence. We want to be able to ask those healthy questions to foster support and accept our imperfections, right? Sometimes the cause of a disease is the disease itself. It's not that you didn't process your anger, it's that we have a disease and we encountered a pathogen at some point in time. And really restoring trust in mainstream medicine. Obviously, I think a lot of trust can be restored once the system is restored. But really starting to bridge that gap, right, between holistic, alternative wellness and modern medicine, because these things don't have to exist separately or in exclusion of each other. We can have both, and that's what's really important. Especially we want to make sure that we are really using those evidence-based practices for public health. So I think part of how we really ethically navigate healthcare, and especially the wellness industry, is to keep in mind that we want to bridge two worlds. There are plenty of complementary medicine practices and things that we can do that have a lot of great evidence behind them. There is a lot of mainstream medicine that has evidence behind it, and there's a lot of mainstream medicine that's harmed people or practitioners who've harmed people. Just because somebody has a license doesn't mean they're totally somebody to reject everything they have to say, just as somebody who has a license doesn't mean that we have to accept everything that they say. Like, we can have great and bad practitioners in both worlds. And so I think of this as like bridging two worlds where we can come together and work as a team in this cohesive environment. And finding those ethical providers is the key to this, right? The people who know the limits of their scope of practice, they know what they can do, they know what they can't do. They explain it in that, amorphous gray area sort of way. Like, this is what we might expect, this is what we don't, here's when I would refer you to somebody else. And we really want to look for that balancing between alternative and modern modalities. And I also think that it's important to say that sometimes there's a lot of benefit to doing something that doesn't have research behind it, that, doesn't have that backing, or like it seems fruitless or woo-woo or whatever it is, because that thing feels good to us, it helps us feel in control, or we just like it and it makes our experience of life a little bit better. That doesn't mean that that thing is the only thing we need to do, or that we need to say that it can cure all these extra things. Sometimes it's just nice to feel nice, and that's something we really want to remember. And my final piece of advice is to be wary and mindful of too good to be true information, and always pause and research practitioners and methods before diving in. If we hear something that's like, wow, that sounds like the solution to all of my life's problems, this is when we really need to take a pause and dig into it. Find that person's reviews, look up more information about them, and really look at it. So thank you so much for tuning in to this presentation today. As I said before, obviously a topic I cared very deeply about, and I care very deeply about helping you guys stay safe and access the care that you really need and you want to have. Again, I'm Dr. Kim Pirano, Doctor of Acupuncture Chinese Medicine. I'm based in Oakland, California. Here's some of my contact information, website kimpirano.com. I post some longer form stuff on Substack, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.